Welcome everybody. I'm delighted that so many of you have chosen to join us this morning. Before we get started, a couple of quick housekeeping points. Firstly, the session is being recorded. The recording will be made available on the Mills Reeve website and the Cambridgeshire Development Forum website. If you wish to remind yourself of the presentations or direct any of your colleagues or contacts to watch the recording, you'll be able to do so, and you should receive an email with a link shortly after the event. Secondly, thank you to all those who have submitted advanced questions. If you have any questions as we move through the presentations, the microphone and video functions will remain disabled for attendees, but you can use the question and answer feature at the bottom of your screens to submit written questions. Right, let's get started. Again, thank you all for joining us this morning for this joint Cambridgeshire Development Forum and Mills Reeve webinar on Central Cambridge Prospects for Recovery. Before I start, Andrew Lansley, who's chair of the Cambridgeshire Development Forum, will speak for a few moments. I'll then introduce myself and our panellists for today, each of whom will deliver a brief presentation. Once the presentations have concluded, we'll move into a discussion section where we'll have an opportunity to hear further from the panellists on a number of points and to hear their responses to your questions. Andrew.
Sarah, thank you very much indeed. And can I add my welcome to all of you attending this webinar, and indeed my thanks to all of our panelists. We have a distinguished and expert panel, really good to have you with us. And very glad to be partnering with Mills Reeve. Together we work in the Cambridgeshire Development Forum with promoters, developers, house builders, lawyers, indeed advisors and planners, with the shared objective of trying to promote high quality development in and around the Cambridge region. Let me just add a note from my point of view, because of course, for a generation, I represented South Cambridgeshire in Parliament, and I continue to live just 7 miles outside Cambridge. And you know, over this last year, instead of being in Cambridge perhaps twice a week, sometimes months have gone by and I haven't been into central Cambridge. But I know how important Cambridge is. Nationally and regionally, it is a major driver of scientific, economic and enterprise growth. It is absolutely vital to the regional and national economy. But locally, to all of us in the necklace villages and the market towns around Cambridge, Cambridge is the heart of that region. And central Cambridge matters enormously to people because very often, particularly in the necklace villages, we don't meet in the villages, we meet in Cambridge. And if people ask me where I come from, I say I come from Cambridge. So the Cambridge, the future, the prospects for recovery in Cambridge and for its future prosperity and growth are absolutely vital to all of us right across the region. So I'm really, I'm very supportive of the discussion we're going to have today and hope it gives us a real, as the phrase goes at the moment, a real roadmap for recovery in Cambridge. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, Andrew. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Sarah Cook. I'm a Principal Associate in the Transactional Real Estate team at Mills Reeve. I'm based in Cambridge. I work largely with investors and developers, a lot of which involves office and retail assets, both in Cambridge and across the country. I've been working with a variety of our clients to navigate the issues presented to their businesses, their projects and their customers by COVID-19 to strategise how they move forwards. However, I do also work with a number of occupiers, so I've seen both sides of the coin throughout the pandemic. Moving on to the panel, our first speaker is Councillor Herbert. Lewis has been leader of the Cambridge City Council since 2014, but has been a Labour City Councillor since 2004. He's also been a member of the Greater Cambridge Partnership Board since 2015 and has been the chair for the past 3 years. Lewis's theme for today is Building Back a Better Cambridge. He'll speak about the city centre's challenges on topics such as retail, the visitor economy, other space options, planning flex and partnership working. Speaking after Lewis and expanding on the retail theme will be Anne Beamish. Anne is the founder of Indie Cambridge, a membership organisation dedicated solely to promoting and supporting local businesses, both off and on the High Street in Cambridge and the surrounding area. Anne will give us her thoughts on the direct and indirect impacts of COVID, including the acceleration of pre-existing trends in consumer habits. She'll also offer some real-life examples of retail innovation, give us reasons for optimism in the retail sector, and touch upon key factors for Cambridge retail when building resilience for the journey ahead. Our third speaker, Daniel Zeishner, Member of Parliament for Cambridge. Daniel is the Shadow Minister and Chair of the All-Party Universities Group. He is an executive member of Labour's National Environmental Campaign Group. Before Daniel became an MP for Cambridge, he had a variety of jobs in the public and private sectors, and he also ran his own business. Daniel will speak about the impact of COVID-19 on international students and visitors, what Cambridge City Centre is for, and how we reopen safely and fairly. Finally, we'll hear from Werner Banker, Group Director of Property at the Howard Group. Werner has overall responsibility for the group's property activities. Holding both a Master's and a PhD in real estate from Cambridge, he's currently the Honorary Press Secretary of the Cambridge University Land Society. Werner's going to speak to us about the Howard Group's perspectives on drivers for recovery, both in terms of their relationship and connection with their customers, and greater collaboration and flexibility in providing real estate solutions, particularly in growth sectors such as technology, research and development, and life sciences. So, how has central Cambridge been affected by COVID-19? What will economic recovery look like, and how will it be achieved? Let's find out what our panelists think. Lewis, the floor, as such, is yours.
Thank you, Sarah and Andrew. So, as leader of the City Council, I just want to cover 5 points in 5 minutes, and I'll focus on central Cambridge, but obviously there's a far wider range of issues. I'm here to listen, and if there are other points that people want to email on after, I look forward to that. So my theme is building back better, but I think it also starts with a role that the City Council hasn't needed to take on until recently, which is an economic development role. We've kind of said that Cambridge looks after itself, but that is not going to be the case. But I'm a great believer in Cambridge, as I'm sure people are on this call. I sum it up as a city of considerable magic, and that's a lot of different dimensions of magic. And I just believe that that is very powerful to start with. But I want to cover building back as well, because we have got really challenged sectors. So we are an extreme economy, like Oxford is, like parts of London. We've not been hurt as badly as many cities, but we've been hurt, and we've got to be cold and clinical about the problems whilst being human focused. So number one, people. And I would add skills and reskilling. There are 2,100 people more on a universal credit than a year ago, and that has particularly hit under 30s. It's hit families that are already on low incomes, and we are passionate believers in the real living wage of at least £9.50. But we've definitely got a lot of hurt people, and I'm sure Anne will cover it, but we've got a lot of hurt local businesses. The government, I think, has done some good things with furlough and a number of initiatives, and we've helped, we hope, address those issues locally by moving out around £30 million in support where it's been needed, and obviously a lot of reliefs, including business rates. But there's limited funds left, so we, along with you, want to hear in the March budget what the recovery plan is. Because at the moment, from government, it's still a blank sheet of paper. Theme 2 is partnerships. I hope that those people who know me and also know the City Council realise that we're totally into partnerships. I can't list them all today, but the combined authority, the really powerful and effective business groupings that there are, and the vital aspect of the Business Improvement District and the leadership of Ian Sanderson and others. Colleges and universities. I walk around our glorious city centre and I can just about reel off which colleges own which streets. So the ARC, we've got a big partnership, particularly with the cities in the ARC, and we're releasing more data on the 9th of March, and we work very closely with Oxford, Milton Keynes, Norwich and others. So point 3, building back, is to focus, and I'm happy to cover this more in the follow-up session, Sarah. Retail damaged, visitor economy damaged, education, including a lot of overseas language education, others aspects damaged. A lot of small businesses far more in difficulties than even some of the bigger businesses. So I think we definitely want to focus the city's efforts to be a contributor to helping that building back, and just recognise that in an otherwise affluent city, which has actually had sectors that have done really well in the last year, we've got damage to put right, and we've got a role in that. Planning, theme 4, big issue, not a lot of time. Local plan and the opportunities of changing policies. We can't have it piecemeal, but we do need to radically rethink aspects of the city centre, as will the people who own those aspects and those assets. So we do need to think about flexibilities to enable different forms of business. I'm a total believer in independence, and I do think this is an opportunity to make our city exciting. We just cannot be a clone city. And lastly, theme 5, net zero carbon. I hope you will all have a look at our climate change strategy. The City Council itself has the opportunity to I think, achieve net zero carbon by 2030. It's not going to be easy. 60% of the emissions in this city are from businesses and similar organisations. And we again will work in partnership, and also with the combined authority, who on the 15th of March, we understand will be publishing the conclusions of a very effective team that are behind their climate change commission. So there are job opportunities there and other things. So I've covered some ground, but it's really by way of intro. I look forward to hearing your questions and also any comments afterwards, and obviously listening to the other speakers. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. So Anne, can we hear from you next, please?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah, and thanks, Lewis. It was good to hear some of your points, because they certainly are part of what I'm sort of going to say now as well. But I'm just going to start off with a sort of little illustration, a story. This time last year, Neil Baradwa, who's a local guy and owner of the Cambridge Fruit Company, was out and about delivering his fresh fruit and veg boxes to the reception desks of his corporate customers. In less than 6 weeks' time, even though he didn't know it, all those customers were literally going to disappear overnight as the UK went into its first lockdown. I mean, after the initial sort of gut-wrenching fear had subsided, Neil headed to Twitter and he asked his loyal followers, "If I started delivering to people's homes, would you buy from me?" And the resounding answer was yes. So Neil completely overhauled his business operation and started serving the local community, delivering to frontline NHS staff and helping out local families in need. He now has over 3,000 customers on his books. So although this isn't a story of a high street retailer as such, I think Neil's story demonstrates quite a few of the attributes, embracing change, being flexible, innovating, and a real strong sense of community, which I believe will help Cambridge to recover and also to build resilience. Another story, that of the changing face of our high street, is sadly not a happy one. But the saddest thing is that actually it's a story that's been playing out for some time now. Cath Kidston, Topshop, Evans, Burton's, Debenhams are all familiar names that are no longer going to be making up the retail offering on Cambridge's high street. The headlines proclaim more high street losses due to COVID. But actually, if you look behind these stories, it's a repeating case of businesses already struggling, and for which COVID just acted as some sort of turbo booster straight to the doors of the administrators. So bigger than COVID, our love affair with online shopping has done far more damage to bricks and mortar retail than the virus has. But throughout successive lockdowns, a new story started to unfold. While our city centre remained quiet, people who are working from home started to need and want to shop more locally to where they live. the boom in takeaways from local restaurants, and the demand for services that you still can't get online shows that despite the start retail numbers, the pandemic has definitely seen a resurgence in the interest in local independent businesses. The Romsey side of Mill Road Bridge, for example, saw 3 new openings in 2020. And although all the businesses that we work with are finding it massively hard, none of them so far have gone out of business. And things were already starting to happen to reflect these changes in consumer habits. As an organisation, Indie Cambridge was already having conversations and continues to have conversations with the Grand Arcade and the Grafton Centre, who have started to recognise and are embracing the independent traders as part of their mix. The Grafton had already started with the arrival of some street food traders, and they were also converting some of their empty stores temporarily into community spaces. And both centres have offered our indie members the opportunity to trade from their locations. Encouraging and incentivising local residents to head back to our high streets, especially now the tourists have gone, should be a challenge taken up by all stakeholders, both in the private and public sectors. And when do we ever hear the voice of the residents for whom Cambridge really lives up to its name of the most unequal city? All this locally centric activity will help Cambridge recover and build resilience, which is exactly what 2020 taught us we needed. Localism has to be at the heart of this recovery plan. And it also feeds into the environmental agenda, increasingly part of consumer decision making, and a really important part of this conversation. Flexibility and innovation is also key. And some high street landlords are already talking about rent-linked turnover, rent-free periods, and more flexible contracts and flexible spaces to trade from. So let's all take this opportunity to create a more multifaceted high street, to include more than just shops, to create destinations where people can also access essential and non-essential services. And at the same time, this will help to create that all-important footfall. Many cities around the world are embracing the concept of the 15-minute community, with shops, recreational facilities, workplaces, services, and educational institutions, all within 15 minutes of where people live. New property classifications brought in last year really have the potential to change the face of the high street. And along with changes to permitted development rights, could actually see some city centre properties turn to residential. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? We don't know yet, but what we do know is that it really needs a plan with all stakeholders involved, with residents and community at its core, and not just left completely to market forces. After all, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to connect the people who live here with the city and build a more resilient Cambridge. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. There's clearly a lot of suffering in the retail sector, but there's also a lot of resilience and sounds like a lot of opportunity out there as well. Daniel, can I ask you to speak next, please?
Thanks, Sarah. And can I first of all agree very much with both those excellent presentations. Can I also say I'm speaking to you from my office in Westminster because for reasons that are lost to many of us, the government still insists on ministers and shadow ministers turning up in person. So whereas most of the country manages to operate on Zoom, Westminster, we still have to be here. I just wanted to reflect a bit on this because I'm an eternal optimist, but I've always said that although Cambridge is very successful, you can't guarantee the future unless you make the right decisions. And I was very much struck by Anne's point that there were already challenges and changes going on, and COVID has accelerated them. But I'd reflect that if we're asking ourselves how we're going to recover, we have got to understand what we're recovering from. And whilst some may think I'm a Brexit obsessive, I would say that actually, when talking to economists, they tell me that places like Cambridge are probably better placed to recover from COVID than some other parts of the country. but that the threat to our national wealth and GDP and growth in future is actually far more challenged by some of the problems we've got with what is actually a very hard Brexit. And I think my worries is a particular difficulty for Cambridge in the sense that our visitor economy, of course, is so linked in to the international situation, and particularly, of course, issues around things like Chinese visitors and Chinese students. Not always been a popular group in Cambridge. I've had many people say to me, why would you have all these Chinese visitors? And it's often been said to me, they don't bring much to the economy. Actually, my sense was going around talking to a lot of traders in the centre of the city at the reopening, I was disabused of that notion. They were telling me actually they are quite important. And of course, at the moment, partly because of the international situation, I think it's a delicate situation, very delicate, and will have an impact on Cambridge. And international students bring a huge amount of benefit to the city. There's some excellent work done a couple of years ago by the Higher Education Policy Institute, headed up by Nick Hillman. Some of you might remember Nick. And they did an assessment by each university city as to how much international students bring. And for Cambridge, 168 million net value each year. So I suppose the question I find myself thinking is, what happens if some of those key visitor groups aren't here in the same numbers in future? What effect does that have on us? And of course, it can create opportunities too. And we have seen some of that when Cambridge becomes less busy with tourists from afar, it can open up opportunities for local people, which I think is great. And it can also open up opportunities for domestic tourism too. And I think the work that the city and others are doing on that is excellent. But we shouldn't, I think, underestimate the risks that we potentially face. And of course, we also have many EU students, or have had in the past, and just in the last few days, we've seen some work that's shown that the changing situation where they will be treated effectively as international students and pay much higher fees is likely to lose universities in the UK some £62 million per annum. Now that will be not shared equally, and I'm sure that the University of Cambridge and Anglia Ruskin will continue to be excellent destinations for people, but all of this has got to be worked for, and it will have a knock-on effect on the people that we see spending money in the city centre. In terms of what we do to help, obviously trying to make the right decisions in terms of national policy would be useful, making sure that the UK and Cambridge remain an attractive place for people to come to, and that it's easy and affordable for them to come to. That's the kind of stuff government can do and should do, in my view. And then is what can be done locally, and there are people much better placed to comment on that. And Lewis has already outlined much of what has been done. But I guess that goes back to my opening point, that I think there were some of these trends around the retail sector already happening anyway, and the shift to online. Again, national policy could possibly help with that in rebalancing that, making it more attractive for local and small traders against the big tech companies. But I suppose my final observation would be that I remain optimistic, because Cambridge remains such a good destination for so many people. When one looks at the very big companies that have invested in Cambridge, I think I was on a call with Dave Cleverley the other morning, and he was saying that there are now £20 billion plus companies invested in Cambridge. Not all of them with all of that in Cambridge, but it's a big investment, and those are people with money to spend. And I think it's just important that we continue to make a very good offer for those people, because there's an international competition going on for talent, and that means making Cambridge, keeping Cambridge as an attractive, environmentally friendly, sustainable city, exactly as Lewis has been outlining. And that also means that tackling the divide, as Anne mentioned, is important too, because people don't want to come to a city which is divided, where there's poverty on their doorstep. I want that changed in itself, but I don't want any poverty in our city, full stop. But it's also important to maintain us as a attractive destination to people. And that ultimately means boosting the skills of a lot of the people in the city in general, and Cambridge Ahead and others have spotted this some time ago. So my final reflection would be to go back to Lewis's point about the economic development functions that councils are having to come back to, because we used to do a lot of this until councils, of course, were so ripped of resources. And I would just gently reflect that we probably need better collaboration between some of the tiers of governance in our county and sub-region, because we have to work with what we've got, but frankly, it could be a lot better. And I think we all would try and make that work. So I think all of that together is what's needed to do to maintain the city centre we love and want to continue to cherish and preserve.
Thanks, Daniel. That was really interesting. And Werner, can we hear your views?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Thank you for the kind introduction. Good morning, everyone. I've been fortunate enough to live in the city now for about 6 years in total, with wife and 3 little ones. It's been a hectic time for sure. But for those of you not familiar with the Outer Group, we are a multi-generational family business based in the city and really have 2 core activities: property investment and development on the one hand, and then Howard Venture capital investment on the other in high growth firms. And throughout the pandemic, really our door has been open, to say the least, to customers, occupiers. That is metaphorically speaking. You know, we've been bolted down during lockdown, I guess, as most of you have been too. But overall, our prospects and our view of the city is a very positive one. We've been embedded in the city for a number of years now and really want to understand what part we can play in the recovery. So you may ask yourself a question, you know, what have we learned over the last 12 months or so? And I'll give a few minutes and a few perspectives on what we have learned. And hopefully you might gain a few insights from that over the next few minutes. But thank you for Mills Reeve and CDF for hosting this event. First perspective really is relationship with a customer. Over the last 12 months, we will have seen an enormous strain on business. You know, many asking and facing serious questions about their survival. And from our perspective, this really has pushed landlord, investor, and occupier closer together than ever before. Now, we've all seen positive examples and negative examples of that across industry. And at the Howard Group, we have placed a significant emphasis on, I guess, our positive relationships and business partnerships, and try to adopt a very open, transparent policy, working with, you know, more than 90 occupiers across our investment portfolio, you know, in Cambridge and beyond. And if I can just give 1 or 2 examples, really, I mean, several of our customers, occupiers in hospitality and retail have had to scale down. Some even have had to close, you know, business operations during lockdown. And, you know, it's been a really critical time for us and for them to get to know each other, you know, get to know their people, their needs, their stories and business models. In various cases, we put together plans to help their continuity of business. And if I just reflect now, you know, we've a number of plans put together included, for example, deferred rental payments or rental holidays, or simply actually pointing them to the government support packages and helping them to understand how those actually are put together. But big picture, it's been enormously helpful for us and for our group just to think differently about the customer, and especially going forward, how we can be far more customer focused. The second perspective really is one on collaboration and flexibility. So I think a number of panelists have referred to Cambridge as, you know, fast growing economy. Actually, it's termed as the fastest growing economy in Cambridge. And a key driver to this is the knowledge intensive business services provided. Think of life sciences, technology, R&D. And I think innovation really is a key driver to the city's recovery going forward. We've got 4,500 high growth firms, and through our venture capital business, we see this very clearly. And I guess two points to make here around how innovation is a key driver to the city's recovery going forward. 2 perspectives, and I'll give a brief example. One of our flagship projects south of Cambridge in the South Cambridge Technology Cluster is a 3-phase development, and phase 1 is just complete, about 50% let. And we really are seeing interest and uptake from the emerging high growth businesses. And how can we cater for that growth best? That being a driver to the city is really two aspects. Well, one is flexibility in the product, and one is flexibility in our approach. So if I just talk to the product very briefly, the works phase 1 completed, and what we have in that product is flexibility. You know, you name it. It's got 10 different entrances for 8 different units. You know, air handling systems, different shower blocks, 200 cycle spaces, and we've seen enormous interest in the flexibility that asset actually provides. And secondly, if we think of future phases, is a move towards lab-enabled offices. This meaning light lab-enabled, extra air handling systems, extra drainage, better ceiling heights, to just give the flexibility across our products as we look forward. The second aspect of flexibility is our approach. So typically, and if we think of landlord, property investor, you've got a very set view of the world. And what we are seeing is a need to look at high growth businesses in a very different way. So looking at track record is so important. We have to look forward as opposed to historic point of view on any high growth firm. They often come in with 12 or 18 months of funding, yet could be the next unicorn. So we've started to adopt more of a private equity perspective, analyzing their cash flows, meeting management, and taking a future view on business, and then thinking about lease terms and security. We've got one or two great examples of a small business, well funded, then growing into the next big thing and actually taking growth space. That, Sarah, concludes my 5 minutes. I really look forward to the Q&A afterwards and hope you've taken a few little lessons from what I've just shared. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Werner. Yeah, that was fascinating. So we've got about half an hour left, so we'll move into the discussion and Q&A section. First question I've got is potentially a controversial one, depending on your views of change of use. As owners of premises to consider the opportunities to respond to the market and government guidance, Policy 41 of the local plan, the protection of business space, requires 12 months of marketing evidence to support planning applications for change of use. Is there a risk that that requirement could hamper recovery if efforts to change the use or redevelop empty or dilapidated shops and offices is delayed? I think that's possibly one for Lewis.
Thank you. So I'm very happy to provide a fuller answer to the questioner. So my take is a bit, as with the discussion that we've had, innovation and different thinking is going to be vital for the city centre. So we're not expecting the visitor economy, tourism. I'm not trying to slow it down. I'd like to speed it up, but we're not expecting the kind of visitor pounds and dollars to be with us until next year. And clearly just this year, recovering retail is a real challenge. So I think my central point, Sarah, would be cities have to have energy. Some residential can provide energy, but I think the energy that I want to see in Cambridge is building on it being different and special and being able to make an offer that isn't available in other places. So clearly its main commercial draw is the nearest 50 miles, but when we actually looked at the numbers, and Daniel quoted one just for overseas students, people were spending big when they were tourists, and even if they were in Cambridge for a relatively short time, even though they annoyed some of our residents, and I can see why, it has to be that energy. So I don't think it would serve the long-term interests of anybody if we just allowed complete piecemeal freedom, but I do see the need to just be completely thoughtful about small startup businesses, about different commercial uses of appropriate spaces. But we need to have ground level energy. And I do think, unlike some cities, Cambridge can repopulate all of that central core, and we can have a successful Grafton Centre, and we can do what we need to do in terms of some of the suburban shopping as well. So I want to retain energy. I mean, I don't think we're going to make any gifts, Sarah, but I'm up for a further discussion, including our planning team, and for there to be an interim review, because local plans take so long, about exactly how is the city centre going to recover? How will it tick in 2 or 5 years' time?
It's open as to whether there might be interim guidance or just a more flexible approach that taken by the council on that.
Proper answer from people who know even more than me, and will share it.
Lovely, thank you. Okay, so moving slightly away from conversions and that topic. Werner, you were talking about demand for research and development in life sciences. Do you think vacant space in the city centre created by changing occupier demands there, and the office and retail is suited to the demands from the growth sectors?
Thank you, Sarah. It's a good question. I think we are seeing enormous demand across high tech. It's a broad field: life sciences, biotech, R&D, and they have different requirements from wet labs to dry labs. Some are very high maintenance, low maintenance. But I think there's no reason it actually couldn't work. City Centre, it's a thought we've had. There are a number of properties, City Centre, that have been empty for a long time. So actually, in terms of rejuvenation, there's no reason it couldn't work. So this theme about LAMP-enabled office, actually the requirements are not always extremely onerous. So I think if we think a little different and introduce some of those uses into the city, back to Lewis's point, I think that really could inject a different type of energy. And I think the word magic earlier was quite an interesting one. There definitely is something about Cambridge that makes what we are and who we are is all about collaboration. So I do think there's plenty of scope to have that conversation to bring life sciences R&D closer into the city.
Okay, thank you. And Anne, you talked earlier about using former retail units for community uses, and you talked about flexibility being key. Can I ask you to expand on that, perhaps on the turnover rents side of things?
Yes, I think it's interesting. I think, like I said, COVID has just acted as this kind of complete turbo boost to a situation that was already, playing out. I think, I mean, I've always thought, maybe something along the lines of the fact that, when you have a new residential development, you have a percentage of, affordable housing. I mean, maybe that's something that could be introduced in a commercial sense, that, it's not that you would have units necessarily that were for independents, but you would have smaller units and a lot more of them. No one big retailer is going to appear on the horizon and take over the Debenham store, for example. But have more flexibility like that. I think I was reading something about the landlords of the London Designer Outlet, which is some sort of destination shopping space in London. They've been using a turnover-linked rents for about the last 7 years, and they've said, the landlords themselves have said that it's given them a better relationship with their tenants. When things are good, they both benefit. When things aren't so good, they both work as hard to change that. So I think like a bit like Werner said, that it's about looking at the relationship between landlords and tenants and doing things differently. And I think if a positive is going to come out of this, it is the fact that those conversations are going to be, a lot more and a lot more beneficial for everybody.
Thanks. We've been asked about drawing workers back into the city centre. This week, L&G submitted plans, and I think Lewis and Daniel, you both referenced the Grafton at points. L&G submitted plans for office collaboration and event space at the Grafton. What more can our city do to bring workers back into the centre once lockdown's lifted? I'm going to open that up to the floor, whoever would like to jump in on that.
So I think taking the Grafton, I think again it is obviously looking to energise and to expand, and as Anne said, we just need to look at the fact that we've got so much space at walking level and at ground floor, and we've just got to rethink how that all clicks and works together. So yeah, we are a visitor centre. I don't think we will have the same number of international visitors, but Cambridge is open for business, and I do think in terms of local visits, particularly within East England and just the attraction from London to come to Cambridge, we should be a really interesting, exciting place. And yeah, people will not need as much retail floor space. So I do not want that suddenly to be piecemeal opportunities for a a mixture of things happening which aren't actually part of an overall change. But I do think in an area like the Grafton Centre, there's an opportunity in the area that most of the people that are in my ward shop in, often rather than in the Grand Arcade, to really do something. The Grafton in that area is vital for everybody in Cambridge, particularly those on middle and lower incomes. And it is a thriving, interesting zone, and it needs equal attention to the city centre heart. And then the city centre heart, I do think there needs to be a collaboration with the bigger landowners. They're well aware that they have to rethink, including the colleges. It isn't going to be 2019 again. We do need to be thinking ahead and have this dialogue about rethinking some aspects of the city centre, whilst making sure that it's a lovable place and a livable place, as well as an energetic space.
Thank you. I've had a question in on health and well-being, whether offices in proximity to community spaces, healthcare infrastructure will help draw people back into the office and complement the business's own staff health and well-being initiatives. Now, Werner, I know the Howard Group have brought about changes to ensure motivated and healthy workforce during the pandemic. How do you see that translating into your office-based working once you return?
Yeah, no, thank you, Sarah. It's a fascinating field we've grappled with, and I think especially during this pandemic, we've I guess got to know each other better, far better than ever before. First name basis with pets and children. So I think what it has highlighted is that we're all human. Behind the various corporate layers and business layers, we all have human needs, and we have health and personal well-being to be very aware of. And I think over the last few months, just with us as the Howard Group, we've introduced little things, quizzes, social quizzes, walk and talk meetings, food deliveries, just very conscious that what is most important is the people we work with. If they are healthy in a good place, the business is more productive, and in a sense, the city recovers quicker. And to partly answer the question that was posed, I think that the future of the office is up in the air, to be honest, in terms of the basic human needs for social interaction. I think as we come out and go forward, the office is less of a space where you sit in front of your screen. It's a place where you interact. Social interactions are vital. So I can see the office building far more that into the office space, and by the same token, being far more aware of its connections to facilities around, be that leisure, be that independent retail. I think a far greater awareness of staff that where I work is important, with whom I work is important, and access to facility, leisure, healthcare is vitally important.
Thanks. That actually links quite nicely into another question we've had about retention of talent and some of the education focus within Cambridge. So going back to remote and hybrid models of desk-based working, it's a similar issue with education and the balance of remote, virtual and face-to-face. And could the cumulative effect on both business and academic remote working have a detrimental effect on collaboration and creativity that could threaten the city's recovery? Longer term, how might it affect the ability to retain talent? Could it reduce the number of graduates and startups being based in Cambridge? And could it reduce the reliance of growth sectors like tech and biomedical on the Cambridge talent pool? Now that's an awful lot of questions. Daniel, I can see you've taken yourself off mute, so I'm going to put that one to you.
Well, yes, they are a very big set of questions, and the answer is probably yes, it could. But I think one of the things that has really struck me about this whole last year is how different people have reacted differently, quite frankly, because and I think it's something perhaps we've never really taken into account, just how different people are. Some people, and I talk to a lot of schools, the assumption is that it's been bad. Actually, some children have done well, because they actually don't like the rough and tumble of interaction. For others, it's been terrible. So different people respond differently, and I suspect different people respond differently in terms of being in the workplace too. I was really worried. I've got a team of young people who work with me who are stuck in, because Cambridge is a high cost accommodation city, a lot of young people living in what I would say is quite cramped accommodation. And I was terrified about the impact it would have on people. Actually, some of my team have really loved it. They prefer working independently. So I think it's going to be different for different people. And that to me is the key with all of this. I go back to Werner's point about rethinking, reinventing the office. It is going to be different in future. I think a lot of the surveys have shown that when people are asked, do they want to go back to before, and whether it's commuting into Cambridge or whether there's quite a lot of people in Cambridge do commute into London, a lot of people can do without it, frankly, and the wasted time. But they still want the interaction. So I think it's all going to be about flexibility, and that's quite difficult for people who are trying to manage space. So that's why we've got to reinvent it. But I'd also say that, of course, we talk about it as if everyone in Cambridge works in the same kind of places. You know, when I go to Amazon and see a very modern kind of workplace near the station, and then I go to old schools at the university, which is perhaps kind of a more traditional form of workspace, that we've already got very different workspaces. And I think that the key is going to be to making it possible for people, and particularly for people who I'd say are dealing with office spaces, to build in that flexibility. And that's quite a challenge in a historic city when we're trying to make sure that we keep the things that are attractive.
Thanks, Daniel. Does anybody else want to comment on that one, or shall I?
Yeah, happy to add a few comments here, if I may.
Of course.
I think that this is the question around the hybrid model, digital connectivity. Is it stifling? Could it stifle innovation? Probably two answers. I'd say the pandemic has really accelerated a lot of our connectivity, digital connectivity. I think especially in certain industries where change is very slow, it's been a real catalyst for adopting new ways of communicating. So in that sense, it's probably enhanced the ability to work together. I think the flip side, coming back to Daniel's point, we have a range. People respond very differently to these facets. I think just being very aware that you've got a range in your workforce and teams, and to be mindful. And the other point, through the Cambridge University Land Society, I've got access to a magazine I put together, and Roger Madlin, joint head of Canada Water, made this very stark point around, I think 70% of employees in the UK are 35 and below. And for that cohort, actually, physical connection, office connection is vital for learning, for mentoring, and all of those facets of career. So there's a strong drive to want to come back together, never mind all the digital forms of connection. So it's a real mixed bag.
I just wanted to come in, Sarah, on the people that aren't in jobs now, because the 2,100 extra people on universal credit and the interruption, particularly to a lot of young people who thought that a job in retail or hospitality was for them. And I remember a personal story. My brother's had a very successful career, but he had huge mental health issues in the early 80s when there was massive unemployment. And he was out of work for 3 years. And I just think that the hidden opportunity for a lot of firms is to look at our own talent in Cambridge, huge skills, huge IT expertise that hasn't been unraveled. I just think we've got a load of people within 15 miles of the centre of Cambridge that are badly in need of a job and are really hungry to learn new skills. And if companies don't make full use of that and the inventiveness that's in so many Cambridge companies and combine that, we will have wasted a lot of opportunity, as well as end up damaging quite a lot of people in their 20s. They take life for granted. But unfortunately, that isn't going to be the case with the overall UK economy for the next 3 years.
Yeah, I think there's so many ways that directions we could take that one. Yeah. But in the interest of time, because we've got about 10 minutes left, I'm actually going to change to a slightly different tack. We've had a question in whatever recovery looks like, there's going to be considerable development, redevelopment, refurbishment. There's opportunities there for improvements to energy efficiency, but it brings with it other environmental costs. So in the 2020 spending review, Rishi Sunak said recovery from COVID-19 must be green. How can Cambridge ensure that whatever recovery looks like, it's green and sustainable? I'll leave that one open as well.
So we've got to rethink energy. We've got to get away from gas. We've got to invest in public transport. So I do think that continuing to deliver for Greater Cambridge, fast public transport has to recover. It's hugely damaged. We can't have a healthy green city unless we've got that. Local food. But I just think, yeah, each company needs to look at their own assets. Facilities management, landlords, we just need to rethink buildings. And yeah, I think we can get used to slightly less heat and in the winter, and actually much better ventilated buildings in the summer. I think some of the most unpleasant offices are unpleasant in the summer, not in the winter. So we've really got to just work with companies and do it as a team effort and share knowledge and use the innovation that we've got in a lot of high-tech, green tech companies in the Cambridge cluster.
Can I just add something to that as well? I think if we're looking at making a more multifaceted high street, I think, and the fact that people are still going to want to have goods and food and everything delivered to their door, I think we should really look at the the companies locally who are doing deliveries by cycles, creating more hubs within the city centre itself and at points around the city, so that can continue to happen, so that because otherwise the streets are just going to become completely clogged by delivery vans, and really just make that a real sort of central point of all this.
Yeah.
Can I just add a little point, Sarah? I think around environmental recovery, I think it's just enormously encouraging, actually. During the pandemic, you could almost say the industry's developed a conscience in terms of, yes, people are focused on financial return, but I think we're seeing far more this idea around social return, environmental return. So that's the first point. I think the second one is, actually we often think of a green recovery as the additional costs one has to factor in, slap on various green badges and all the extra work that needs to be done. And actually, through a bit of experience with the group, we've seen actually repurposing existing buildings. That's a way of actually putting less carbon into the environment. If you think of real estate or concrete production, it's 40% of all carbon emissions are through built environment. Actually, repurposing existing stock immediately has an impact. Our example in Sawston, that's an existing industrial building repurposed. It's not a new build in a sense. And we are seeing this from the institutional funders, which is another positive movement, this requirement from the funding market to deliver greener product. So I think there's a number of factors we are seeing in industry which are all pointing in the right direction. And that the pandemic has definitely, in my mind, accelerated a lot of this thinking.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we've got about 5 minutes left. I'm just going to ask a couple of questions looking to the future, and then a question that none of you have seen. I'm going to ask you, I'm going to give you 5 minutes to think about this, what you consider to be Cambridge's greatest opportunity for recovery in the next 12 to 18 months. So I'll come back to that. In the meantime, we've been asked about a post-lockdown bounce similar to last May, and whether the panelists, whether you're all thinking that we will see similar, whether there'll be a different profile. Can we get your thoughts on that, please?
Well, quite happy to come in on that. I think almost certainly there will be some, and I think that's what economists are predicting, but I think it'll be quite uneven. And going back to Lewis's point, for Cambridge, unemployment has not really been an issue for some time, but it is now for a lot of people. And I think there is the danger that it will be a quick bounce back for some, but leaving a lot of people behind. And that, as I intimated in my opening comments, I think will have a wider knock-on effect on the city. So it's a question of whether it's just left unplanned or whether there are interventions. And of course, that is the political debate that will unfold, I suspect, over coming months.
I suspect what those interventions are going to be closely watched and commentated on as well. Okay, so actually, Daniel, you talked earlier about Brexit and the potential for that to eclipse COVID in terms of its impact. Are there any other factors, or do you have any views on, you know, how long term that is going to be as an impact?
Well, I was on a very interesting call with academics last week who were asking this very question, and I think the worry and the view of the economists I'm talking to is that the COVID bounce back probably will be quite quick, but the structural problems that have been introduced, you know, I suspect most people on this call probably share my view about Brexit, but you know, we are where we are. The problem is that the version of Brexit that the government went for in the end actually is a very hard one. And part of the problem is the instability. I don't think people have fully grasped this yet. We're sort of seeing it in some of the tit for tat stuff that's going on at the moment. But unfortunately, this is probably the way it's going to be for some time. And the trade and continuity agreement actually is going to be up for almost permanent renegotiation. And that is difficult because it's very hard for people to predict where we're going to be in a few years' time. And that, for business, everyone tells me is the real difficulty. But we've got to make the best of it we can. And I do think Cambridge is in a stronger position because we've got some very strong fundamentals. And you know, we love the University of Cambridge, and it's a huge plus to have an institution like that, which has got international renown and stability attached. And we must make full advantage of that, in my view.
Great, thank you. Right, so my question to all of the panelists was, what do you consider to be Cambridge's greatest opportunity for recovery in the next 12 to 18 months? So, Lewis, if we...
So in addition to just skills, I think my issue would be the huge energy and entrepreneurship of younger people. So I've got two sons now in their 30s, both run their own businesses. I wouldn't have dreamed of doing that in my late 20s. I just think that, and the fact that there genuinely is a lot of underused space. So in addition to the opportunity for local independent businesses to flourish and for them to be assisted, I just think that combination, Sarah, of just there is an entrepreneurship in every young 25 or 35-year-old, and quite a lot of them have not currently got a vision about what they're going to do in the next few years. So I'd like to combine that with the space that we've got in the city centre and see new ideas, new creativity flourish.
Lovely, thank you. Anne?
Yeah, I guess from a high street perspective, I would say that you know, we have got this opportunity now that the visitor market is no longer, you know, happening. I'm sure it will return at some point, but I think this is a real opportunity now to encourage, you know, residents to actually kind of reclaim their city. Research we've done has shown that actually a lot of local people were choosing not to go into the city centre because of the large tourist footfall and the large groups. And actually, if you look at the small number of businesses in the city centre that actually do benefit from that tourist footfall, I mean, literally, you're talking about a couple of streets, you know, the Grand Arcade, King's Parade, Trinity Street, that sort of thing. And independent businesses want to actually build long-term relationships with their customers. And they're in other parts of the city that, you know, a tourist would never step into. So I think that would be my thing, to actually, you know, launch a campaign to get the residents using Cambridge again.
Thank you. Daniel?
I think it's an opportunity to do what a lot of us have wanted to do for a long time, which is the ambition to make Cambridge the best small city in the world. And we've got so many advantages to start with. And I think the key is to build on that. It's all around, to me, it's around the people. I do think we want to maintain a steady flow of people coming and going from other parts of the world, because that's what makes Cambridge so successful and so important. But also, I think go for a quality recovery, go for high quality. If we would go back into a period of austerity and keep on cutting our public services, I'm afraid that is not the way Cambridge is going to be successful in the future. So be ambitious, invest, and go for quality.
Great, thank you. And Werner.
Thank you, Sarah. I think, not to sound like a broken record, it's definitely people. I think that's one thing we have seen, focusing and allowing people to be far more entrepreneurial. And I think the second theme is this high growth business theme, doing what it is we can to continue attracting talent to the city and making sure the talent that we already have here, it is enabled to flourish and build into this dynamic. We're seeing it all around. There's an awareness that Cambridge really is a global centre for tech, R&D, life sciences, and we shouldn't forget that.
Great. Thank you very much. Well, it's been really fascinating to get your insights into the subjects today. So thank you all for taking the time to join us. Thank you to everybody who submitted questions. We are going to try and take a note of those and send those out to the speakers so that there's the opportunity for follow-up. And as I said at the beginning, the webinar has been recorded, so we will get that out. There should be links coming up to each of you by email, and they'll also be available on the website. So just remains to thank the speakers again for joining us, everybody on the in the audience for joining us as well, and I hope everybody has a good morning.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.